But Ponzi raised the idea to a new level. Thanks to his system, Ponzi promised investors 50% returns in 45 days or 100% in 90 days. Hello, Team Mindset. Today we're going to tell you the story of a name everyone knows, Ponzi. Yes, you all know him because of all the financial scams you've heard about. But do you know about the unlikely event that gave his name to all of them? This is the incredible story of the foolish financial genius who scammed the entire world. There was a time when the financial world marveled at the genius of Charles Ponzi, the man who was at the head of one of America's most successful business investments. He had millions of dollars at his disposal, and crowds of people lining up, literally begging him to take their money. Not everyone knew that the Ponzi scheme was based only on lies. The whole thing was a scandalous scam that made Ponzi a very rich man, but ruined the lives of thousands of innocent people. Ponzi's notorious scam was so impactful that a century later, similar schemes are still called Ponzi schemes. This video is the untold truth about the man behind the scam and about how to make millions of dollars off our lives. Charles Ponzi was born in Italy on March 3, 1882. His father was a hard-working postal worker, and the family was financially comfortable. But it was more than that. Ponzi's grandparents and great-grandparents had all been successful businessmen, merchants, and civil servants. Devotion to the working class really affected Ponzi from a young age and made him bitter and resentful. He wondered why he had to endure his family's misfortune. Why couldn't he have been born wealthy and lived a carefree life without worrying about work or money? As a teen, Ponzi inherited a modest sum after his father died. He used it to enroll in university, as his mother insisted he attend a prestigious one, to get an education there. But Ponzi had other plans. Instead of studying and going to class, he decided to spend his savings dressing in the latest fashion and eating at the city's most upscale restaurants. In the evening, perhaps the theater, opera, or gambling at the casino with rich friends. Nothing was too extravagant or too expensive for him. Ponzi liked to pretend that he was like his wealthy friends and that he had money to spare. But it was an illusion, and one day, everything fell apart. His inheritance money eventually ran out. Since he had neglected his studies, he had no chance of graduating. His uncle offered him an office job, but the idea of finding a 9-to-5 job repels Ponzi, who considers himself too good for a menial job. He feels that he has only one choice left: to travel to America and become rich there. In 1903, Ponzi arrived in Boston and felt deep shame in his heart for having let his mother down. He believed the only way to redeem himself was to return to Italy wealthy. The only problem was that he had no idea how to do that. America turned out to be a much-needed reality check for young Ponzi. There was no more inheritance, no more money, and no more relatives to bail him out. He disliked physical labor, but had no choice. He had to work to eat. Ponzi spent the next few years traveling along the East Coast from New York to Florida. He worked as a painter, waiter, grocery clerk, dishwasher, factory worker, insurance salesman, and sewing machine repairman. None of the jobs he did lasted very long. However, Ponzi either quit because he hated the job or he was fired because he tried to cheat the customers. That means he had to steal and sleep in parks. It was a far cry from his carefree days and his time as a high roller in Rome. And even when Ponzi managed to scrape together a little money, he inevitably spent it on a big night out or a weekend getaway, just to remember the good old days. In 1907, Ponzi traveled to Montreal, seeking a more welcoming and profitable environment in Canada. And at first, things were going pretty well. He found a job as a clerk in a bank that mainly served Italian immigrants, the Banca dei Rossi. It was the same job Ponzi had refused in Rome, thinking he was above it. But it was surprising to see how just a few years spent on the street working for minimum wage could change his perspective. Unfortunately for Ponzi, his new job didn't last long either, because his boss was a crook. So, De Rossi used an old scam known as robbing Peter to pay Paul. He used money from new clients to pay back older ones. This led De Rossi offer 6% interest on all bank deposits, twice the average rate. However, his clients grew suspicious after their relatives back home said they hadn't received the money the bank was supposed to send. By mid-1908, the authorities began investigating the bank for embezzlement, and that's when De Rossi fled to Mexico, leaving his employees and family to deal with the fallout from the scam. Ponzi intended to return to the United States so he wouldn't have to take part in the investigation and the fallout from de Rossi's scam. Before that, he did something foolish to avoid starting over. He decided to give himself a farewell gift by forging a check from a client of his bank, a shipping company called Canadian Wealth and Company. Ponzi took a blank check from the manager and wrote it for $423.58. Ponzi thought it was a believable, non-suspicious amount. When he tried to cash the fake check, the teller immediately noticed the forged signature and called the police. Ponzi received 3 years in San Vincent de Paul Penitentiary, but this was just the start of his crimes. Ponzi was paroled after 2 years and immediately planned to return to the United States. But he didn't go alone. He brought 5 Italian immigrants, all just off the boat and undocumented, because he had been paid to smuggle his men into America. Ponzi thought that would allow him to make a good and quick salary. Now that he's a free man again, he gets caught and arrested once more. However, Ponzi hoped that if he pleaded guilty, the judge would be lenient with him and maybe let him off with a small fine. But once the judge struck his gavel and pronounced the sentence, Ponzi's heart sank. He was sentenced to 2 more years in a federal prison in Atlanta. After his second release from prison, Ponzi was unsure of his next move. He had come up with all sorts of plans to get rich while in prison, but they all required money, and Ponzi was penniless. With few options, he wandered between states, taking any odd jobs he found. He later got a good clerk job at J.R. Paul Company, an import-export firm in Boston. After 15 years in North America, he ended up back where he started. Ponzi's life was definitely better in Boston. However, this was the first time he was good at his job, and he was promoted. He even fell for 21-year-old Rogelico. During their first conversation, Ponzi was so nervous he could barely speak. Fortunately, the feeling is mutual, and they marry in early 1918. His new married life made Ponzi happy, but he felt inadequate. Rose was happy with a simple life, but Ponzi had bigger ambitions and wanted to provide for her, with diamond rings, luxury clothes, and costly vacations. Obviously, that was never going to happen on a meager salary. 6 months after the wedding, Ponzi quit his job at J.R. Paul and searched for new work. He started by joining his father-in-law's wholesale fruit business. The company was struggling. Since Ponzi often bragged to his wife about his financial genius, this was his chance to prove himself to everyone. However, Ponzi was not able to save the business, which went bankrupt at the end of the year. Discouraged by his recent failure, Ponzi rented a small office to start an import-export business. But the world didn't notice. Ponzi lacked the experience and connections to attract serious business. However, Ponzi didn't think he was the problem and believed he just needed to advertise his services more. A few quick calculations showed the costs were far beyond his reach. That's why his business became a failed business. The only positive point for Ponzi was that this failure had already given him his next idea. When Ponzi realized the cost of advertising his services, he considered publishing his own trade magazine so other businesses would pay him similar advertising fees. Ponzi had no experience in publishing, but in his mind it was already a $1 million business idea. He named his magazine The Trader's Guide and mailed it free to 100,000 businesses, doubling circulation each edition. Ponzi estimated his first mailing would cost $35,000, but earn $80,000 in ad revenue. He was confident businesses would rush to advertise in his magazine. Certain of success, Ponzi rents a larger office and hires 3 staff. Then he starts writing to investors and business owners about the opportunity to participate in the very first edition of The Trader's Guide. Then reality hit Ponzi like a ton of bricks. No one was interested. No one cared about his obscure little trade magazine, and people certainly aren't willing to pay those exorbitant rates to be featured in it. When Ponzi went to his local bank to get a loan, because he was almost out of money, he got another harsh dose of reality. The bank president denied his request, leaving Ponzi with little choice and a bitter pill to swallow. He laid off staff and sublet his offices to make money. But his dreams and ambitions remain as strong as ever, and Ponzi hopes that his next idea will be the one that makes him rich. One day in August 1919, while checking his mail, Ponzi noticed a letter from Spain. At the time when he still thought that the Trader's Guide would become the next big thing in advertising, Ponzi wasn't just doing business in America. He considered translating his guide into French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese, and expanding to Europe. Unless he had reached out to many foreign companies to propose business, it seems at least one was interested. The Spanish author of the letter requested a copy of the guide, and Ponzi had never seen that in the past. Previously, the international reply coupon was prepaid coupons that could be exchanged for stamps. Post offices in Universal Postal Union member countries. It was commonly used by people who sent letters abroad to cover the cost of a return letter, when they did not expect the other person to pay for the postage. For Ponzi, however, it was inspiring and would change his life forever. Years earlier, Ponzi had become familiar with the concept of arbitrage, a strategy that involves buying and selling an asset on different markets in order to take advantage of the price difference and make a profit. With these reply coupons, they were always exchanged for the same postage value, no matter the country. They were purchased at slightly different prices due to local currency fluctuations. In theory, Ponzi could therefore buy a reply coupon in Italy, where the lira had taken a serious hit after the war, then exchange it in the United States for American postage stamps. He knew that the value in dollars would be slightly higher. He would then sell these stamps and make a small profit. By scaling the operation to thousands or millions, he made a lot of money. This was Ponzi's new business plan, which looked like a good idea and a legal arbitrage on paper, a proven investment strategy used for centuries. So, in January 1920, Ponzi created a new company to manage what seemed to be his most promising business yet. He named it the Securities Exchange Company. Unfortunately for Ponzi, as before, reality shattered his hopes and dreams. The truth was that the profits from arbitrage were so small that they would be completely wiped out by the cost of shipping from one country to another. There literally wasn't enough in the whole world to support the kind of operation that Ponzi was imagining. Still, he clung to the idea. Ponzi was sure this was his golden goose, his ticket to the wealth and luxury he always felt he deserved. So, when the legitimate business proved to be unviable, he turned his idea into the infamous Ponzi scheme that now bears his name. So even if it wasn't good at all, maybe he could convince other people that it would work and take their money. Basically, the Ponzi scheme is similar to the classic fraud of robbing Peter to pay Paul, which Ponzi saw firsthand when he worked for Bancarossi. It's about getting people to invest in a business opportunity by promising them huge returns in a short time, with little or no risk. However, their money is never really invested. Instead, the scammer keeps most of the money for himself, while giving some of the profits to earlier investors. And when these investors see such large returns, most of them agree to reinvest their profits in the business to make even more money. Everything seems to be working as advertised. Many discuss this opportunity with others, confident the profits are legitimate. In reality, early investors are just being paid with money from new investors. It's a simple yet effective system that takes advantage of greed and financial naivety, relying on a constant flow. Builder. It needs new funds to continue the scam. As soon as the fraudster can no longer find enough new investors to pay back the returns to the old investors, the scam usually collapses. Even though the scheme is named after Ponzi, he wasn't the first to do it. A New York accountant named William Miller used the same technique to swindle $1 million from investors in 1899. A German actress, Adele Spitzer, may have run the first known Ponzi scheme outside America in the early 1800s. But Ponzi took the idea to a whole new level. Thanks to his system, Ponzi offered investors a staggering return of 50% in 45 days or 100% in 90 days. He said he had a global network of agents who bought in bulk and shipped to America. If questioned about his operation, Ponzi declined to provide details, only saying he couldn't reveal exactly how it worked. That might help his competition, as most banks, companies, and serious Ponzi investors avoided Ponzi. They knew if something seemed too good to be true, it was messed up. In fact, almost anyone who knew a thing or two about finance could tell that it was impossible for Ponzi to keep his promises. But Ponzi didn't target those people. He wanted people who were like him, with more dreams than common sense, who were always looking for the best way to get rich quickly. That means he targeted people with very little financial knowledge. Often people are desperately in need of money. Quickly, Ponzi realized that his real talent wasn't handling finances, but handling people. He knew how to sell his business without seeming too eager or aggressive, as if it didn't matter to him whether he got their money or not. And Ponzi started with people from his own neighborhood. He got 18 of them to invest in his first month after they received their initial profits. Word spreads quickly, and soon thousands of people start crowding the streets in front of Ponzi's offices, eager to invest their own money in this amazing opportunity. Month after month, Ponzi attracted more clients, earning over $250,000 daily. At the height of his activity, the Boston Post featured Ponzi as a financial genius, which gave him even more perceived credibility and therefore more investors. Ponzi was able to live the life he had always dreamed of. He moved into a giant mansion, bought a fast car, dressed only in expensive clothes, and wore luxury watches and diamond brooches, and took lavish trips. In first class, that's the lifestyle Ponzi always thought he deserved, but he couldn't enjoy it. Less than 6 months after Ponzi started his business, doubts arose about his operation at the start of summer. At first, everyone was afraid to say anything, because Ponzi had managed to sue a financial analyst for defamation, accusing him of lying. Many early investors had already been paid, which Ponzi claimed proved everything was legal. But the Boston Post, the same newspaper that had proclaimed Ponzi a genius, began to investigate his operation. They brought in Clarence Barron, Dover's president, and Claude Jones, Wall Street Journal director, who uncovered the scheme. Ponzi calculated he needed to buy 160 million, but only 27,000 existed worldwide. In July 1920, the Post published Barron's findings on its front page, labeling Ponzi a fraudster and prompting an investigation into his company. But justice moves slowly. Ponzi eased officials' concerns by fully cooperating and agreeing to stop taking new investments while under scrutiny. Ponzi caused his own downfall by hiring William McMasters as his publicist. Unlike Ponzi, McMasters was an honest man who quickly realized that his client was a complete fraud. He later called Ponzi a financial idiot who could barely add. He sits with his feet on the desk, smoking cigars with a diamond holder, and talks about postal coupons and gibberish. With access to all of Ponzi's records, McMasters gathered the necessary evidence. He joined the Boston Post and wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning exposé. This time, the game was truly over, and Ponzi's scheme collapsed. Several banks had to declare bankruptcy, and tens of millions of people lost their savings. And Ponzi himself was charged with 86 counts of mail fraud. However, the con artist reached a deal and pleaded guilty to 1 count of mail fraud, receiving just 50 federal prisons, a relatively small amount, considering the enormous amount of money stolen and the immense number of lives ruined. Ponzi was released after 3.5 years in prison, supposedly reformed and ready to do good. No, I'm kidding. He literally tried a new scam immediately after being released. Ponzi knows that the government either wants to deport him to Italy or put him back in prison for theft. So he fled to Florida, where he planned to repeat the Ponzi scam. He created a new company, the Sharp On-Land Syndicate, and looked for people to invest in properties around Jacksonville. He promised even higher returns than before, claiming he could offer people a 200% profit in just 60 days. The problem was the property he was selling. It was a worthless swamp. This time, though, no one was interested. The Ponzi scheme is quickly uncovered, and he risked being sent to Massachusetts for a long sentence. Not wanting to return to prison, Ponzi disguises himself and tries to reach Italy as a sailor on a cargo ship. However, he was recognized and arrested in New Orleans. Ponzi was now a desperate man. He even wrote to Mussolini to intervene on his behalf. But of course, no one listened. It was the end for him. Ponzi spent another 7 years in prison, and the man who came out was not the same as the one who went in. Ponzi was a broken wreck who had lost all the charm and confidence that had made him so rich. Facing deportation to Italy, his wife stayed in America and divorced him. Ponzi lived his remaining years in poverty, comforted only by memories of his former success. He ended up in Rio de Janeiro, where he died in 1949 in a charity hospital and was buried in a pauper's grave, thus ending one of the most notorious stories of going from riches to rags. However, in terms of the amount of money, the Ponzi scheme is not one of the biggest financial frauds. Let us know in the comments what you thought of this story, and if you would like us to cover other financial personalities in this way. Thank you for watching the video until the end, and share it with someone who needs to know this story.